greet our friends everywhere with Chapter 25 of To Ask No Man, the story of George Mueller's incredible adventure with God. This is another in the series Stories of Great Christians, brought to you by the Moody Bible Institute of Chicago.
Lydia!
Hush, George. I'll be all right.
Lydia! Kommen Sie her! Schnell! Your mother, she's worse. Lydia! Schnell!
It happened just 3 weeks after the fifth and by far the biggest orphanage was finished. January 1870.
Stay with her, Lydia. I'll get the doctor.
With his 2 new orphanages built, George planned to house 2,000 boys and girls on Ashley Downs. He'd reached the pinnacle of his life. It seemed quite as if everything else along the way had been building up to this. He'd achieved what he'd always wanted, a great, tangible monument to God's faithfulness. And then...
Daddy, hurry!
For months, Mary had a cough. But the day the orphanage was dedicated, standing outside in the bleak January drizzle, she caught a heavy cold. The cough got worse. On Sunday night, January 30th, she woke with pain stabbing her back. For a week she suffered, and then...
Daddy, is Mother...
Oh, Lydia. Oh, my daughter. Now we are all alone.
And on February 6th, 1870, George stood in the Gideon Chapel and preached his most unusual sermon.
I purpose to preach this funeral sermon, not because Mary Mueller was my beloved wife, nor do I preach because I want to speak highly of her, but I preach today because I want to magnify the Lord. He gives her to me. He leaves her to me so long, and he takes her away from me to himself. Her whole life was blameless, so it is good that we ponder together the lessons her life should teach.
Good morning, Lydia.
Good morning, Jim.
Lydia, I've been wanting to find a chance to tell you how really sorry I am about your mother.
It was God's will. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an errand.
Lydia, you've been so very brave.
I have an errand over at the other house.
I admire the way you've accepted it. You have a very strong faith, but I know that doesn't take away all that loneliness that you
And
must
what
feel.
do you know about loneliness, Jim Wright?
Well, Lydia,
When do you go home to a lonely room? What do you know about that? You go home to a cozy supper and somebody that's always there to love you.
Lydia.
How does it feel to have 1 or 2 people to lean on a little to ease the loneliness that's always there, and then have one of them snatched away? Oh, Jim Wright, don't talk to me about that kind of loneliness. You don't know about it, and you never will.
Lydia, your father wanted to see me in his office. I think perhaps I'd best go in.
I think you'd better.
I am sorry, Lydia. George?
Herein. I was waiting for you. Shut the door.
I was just talking to Lydia.
Ah, poor Lydia. Here, take a chair. I will stretch out on my couch a little bit. So. Poor Lydia. She is taking this very hard.
Yes.
At heart, well, she's still the little girl with the big eyes and the fancy dreams. If only she... well, I didn't bring you here to talk about my family.
George, you've come through all this remarkably well.
Only by his grace. But it does sober. Makes me realize time is flying past. We all get old.
No, George.
I'm 65, Jim, and a little bit more. Not so much time have I left either. Jim, that's why I wanted to see you.
Why, George?
When I built my homes, I always told God I will worry about this generation today. It is enough. It isn't for me to fret about what comes after. But now...
Now?
I don't want to make it sound like I think I'm Elijah, Jim. But in a way, that's what I do. I want to throw my mantle onto your shoulders.
My shoulders? Oh, George,
Jim, I've known you for so long. Since you were 19. And for the last 13 years, you've been my right-hand man here.
I suppose you might say, like the orphans, I've grown up in these homes. Grown up spiritually, at least.
Grown up enough to take over if anything should happen to me, even tomorrow. But young enough to be my son. Only 7 years between you and my own Lydia, Jim. You're only 45. Young enough to outlive me for a long time.
Oh, please. George,
It isn't pleasant business, I know, but it must get done. Well, Jim, what do you say?
You want me to take over this gigantic organization when you...
Yeah. Take it over and run it.
As you would run it. Well, it's a big order.
That's not what I order, Jim.
What?
Never the way George Mueller would run it. The way God himself would run these homes. That's what I ask, Jim.
It's still a big order.
Well?
I don't know, George. I don't think I'm big enough for it.
Your humility makes you big.
Well, for one thing, I don't believe I have your faith. I honestly don't.
That comes from God. You ask if you want it badly enough.
No, I don't know. Besides, I'm not the businessman you are, George. You have a natural shrewdness. I'm more of a plodder.
I will teach you. There's still time.
Well, maybe, but I wonder.
Something else?
Yes.
Your wife?
Yes. I know what she'll say.
No?
Well, she believes in the work. Never objected to my helping you, but she's timid. If her health were better.
Talk to her, Jim.
I will, but I know already what she'll say. I'd be chancing our security if I were to take on the whole burden here.
Then you can't say yes.
Well, not now, anyway. I have to talk to her.
And pray. Jim, I know you're the one. God has made it so very clear.
Then he'll work things out. We both believe that, don't we, George?
At first it was quite as Jim Wright feared. I suppose his wife had seen enough of old George's daring leaps of blind faith, and she was determined that her husband wouldn't jeopardize their security by trying to walk in his footsteps. But finally she did give in. George officially appointed Jim Wright as his successor to take over at George's death. About 6 months later, another tragedy quite unexpectedly struck the orphanage staff.
Jim?
Oh, good morning, Lydia. Like some help carrying those blankets?
Jim, I just wanted to say I'm sorry.
I know you are, Lydia. Look here, I'm going over in your direction. Can't I carry those?
I'm awfully sorry about your wife. I know these must be terrible days for you, Jim.
Well, I found out about that loneliness, Lydia.
Oh, I'm sorry for that, too, Jim. Sorry for being so awful that day.
Oh, you had to strike out at somebody. I just happened to be the one that was in your way. I know now.
Jim, if you believe it's all part of a pattern, well, that helps some.
Thank you for that, Lydia.
When you get the loneliest, well, sometimes God seems to be standing right there in the room with you. I know. It isn't just Mother's dying. I think I was always a little lonely.
Perhaps we all are.
And, Jim, something else helps, too.
What's that, Lydia?
Hard work, lots of it. The kind of work that makes your arms ache. Did you say you wanted to help me carry these blankets?
Sure I did. Yeah, give me half.
Oh, that's not half. That's almost all of them.
Just want to make sure my arms ache. Come on, Lydia, you lead the way.
A year went by, a year of very hard work for everybody who had anything at all to do with the feeding, clothing, and educating of the 2,000 children on Ashley Downs. And then one day in August, 1871...
Jim, I don't like to see anybody perched on that squeaky little chair very long. Why not relax on my little sofa by the window? Then we have a good talk.
Well, that's all right, George. I may not be here so long. I'm fine.
But you said you had special business.
I do.
There's trouble, and you don't want to tell me. Well, what is it now? Fever in House 5?
No.
Little Jeremy fools with the gas jets again?
No, nothing like that.
Mrs. Twombly resigned again.
George,
But it is trouble, yeah.
No.
I read your face like a book, Jim.
No, not trouble. At least, I hope.
Jim, what ails?
Mr. Mueller, George... Well, I never thought I'd be sitting in this office saying what I'm about to say, but...
Yeah.
Well, George... Mr. Mueller... Father...
Father?
Well, I want to ask you, George, I want to marry Lydia.
You what?
Oh, you're as surprised as I am.
What?
Well, I mean, I never thought, well, who'd have thought when I came here, even last year?
Jim, my boy.
Well, she's lonely, and I'm lonely, and...
You marry out of loneliness, that's all?
Oh, no. I love Lydia.
Good.
Good? You mean...
Now, what did you expect me to say, Jim? Did you expect me to say, I'm sorry, Jim Wright. You are good enough to take care of my orphans, but you are not good enough to take care of my daughter.
Well, I never really thought of it that way.
I have a very high regard for my orphans, you know. Didn't I leave them with you?
Well, yes, but...
So, there is your answer.
Well, I never thought it would be so easy.
Well, what did you think? What does a middle-aged man in love think?
Well, I thought both Lydia and we thought about you.
Me?
You two have been so very close. Always. You look alike, you think alike.
Oh, not always. There's a lot of her mother in her, too. Always bustling. You will see.
But lately, well, she's been there to cook your meals, make a home for you.
I see.
She worried about what will happen to you now. For a while, actually a long while, she said no, but she just said she just couldn't stand to leave you to nothing but loneliness.
Oh, that wonderful child.
She knows you so well, George.
Maybe she does, and maybe she doesn't. I mean, Jim, listen to me. It's true, Lydia has made a home for me since the last year and a half.
Well, that's it. What will you do now?
But I have not spent every moment at home.
What?
I explain later. But first let me say, you and Lydia get married, right away, soon as you want. My blessings on you. I couldn't be happier.
But George, Lydia's going to be so relieved. We know what you're sacrificing when you give her up.
Now you be quiet. I will tell you something that will surprise you. Maybe I won't be such a lonely old man as my daughter, who knows me so well, thinks.
And so we conclude Chapter 25 of To Ask No Man, the story of George Mueller's incredible adventure with God. This is another in the series Stories of Great Christians, which come to you transcribed from the Moody Bible Institute of Chicago.